Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be discussing an important concept in research which is hypothesis, its types and sources. Understanding hypothesis is very important because it acts as the foundation of any research study. Without a clear hypothesis, research can easily lose direction and become unstructured. So in this video I'll explain the concept in clear and simple way. Definition of hypothesis. A hypothesis is a tentative and testable statement that predicts a relationship between two or more variables. In other words, it is an assumption or an educated guess that a researcher makes before conducting the actual study. However, it is important to understand that a hypothesis is not just any guess, it must be based on logical reasoning, pure knowledge, or existing theories. For example, a researcher may assume that increased study times leads to better academic performance. This assumption can then be tested using real data. Role of hypothesis in research. A hypothesis plays a central role in the research process. First, it provides a clear direction to the study by focusing on a specific relationship between variables. Second, it helps in identifying independent and dependent variables which are essential for designing the research. Third, it guides the researcher in collecting relevant data and choosing appropriate methods of analysis. Finally, it allows the researcher to test theories and draw meaningful conclusions. Therefore, a well-defined hypothesis makes research more scientific, systematic, and efficient. Types of hypotheses. There are several types of hypotheses used in research. A simple hypothesis involves only one independent variable and one dependent variable, making it easy to test. A composite hypothesis, on the other hand, does not fully specify all aspects of the population or relationship. A parametric hypothesis includes specific population parameters such as mean or variance and is tested using statistical methods. In contrast, a non-parametric hypothesis does not involve such parameters and is usually applied when data does not meet certain assumptions. Understanding these hypotheses helps researchers choose the appropriate method for testing. Now let us focus on one of the most important parts of the hypothesis testing, which is the null and alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis, denoted as H0, is a statement that assumes there is no effect, no difference, or no relationship between variables. It represents the default or starting assumption in statistical testing. On the other hand, the alternative hypothesis, denoted as H1 or HA, is the statement that contradicts the null hypothesis. It suggests that there is a significant effect, difference, or relationship. To understand this more clearly, let us consider an example. Suppose we want to test whether a new teaching method improves student performance. The null hypothesis would state that the new teaching method has no effect on student performance. The alternative hypothesis would state that the new teaching method does have an effect on student performance. In statistical testing, we do not directly prove the alternative hypothesis. Instead, we test the null hypothesis. If the evidence from the data is strong enough, we reject the null hypothesis. If we reject the null hypothesis, it means there is sufficient evidence to support the alternative hypothesis. However, if we fail to reject the null hypothesis, it does not necessarily mean the null hypothesis is true. It simply means there is not enough evidence against it. This distinction is very important for understanding how hypothesis testing works in real research. Direction and non-directional hypothesis. A directional hypothesis specifies not only that a relationship exists but also the direction of that relationship. For example, it may state that one group performs better than another. In contrast, a non-directional hypothesis only indicates that a difference or relationship exists, without specifying which direction it will take. This choice depends on the researcher's pure knowledge and expectations. Errors in hypothesis testing. While testing hypothesis, errors may occur. A type 1 error occurs when the null hypothesis is rejected and even though it is actually true. This is also known as a false positive. A type 2 error occurs when the null hypothesis is not rejected even though it is false. This is known as a false negative. These errors show why careful statistical decision making is necessary in research. Deductive and inductive approaches. There are two main approaches to developing hypotheses. The deductive approach begins with a theory from which a hypothesis is derived and then tested using data. The conductive approach works in the opposite direction. It begins with observations, identifies patterns, and then develops a hypothesis or theory. Both, both approaches are important and are used depending on the nature of the research. Sources of hypotheses. Hypotheses can come from many different sources. Researchers often develop hypotheses from existing literature and previous studies. Scientific theories and conceptual frameworks are also major sources. In addition, personal observations, social problems, and real-life experiences can inspire hypotheses. In expert opinions and technological advancements can also play an important role. Characteristics of a good hypothesis. A good hypothesis should have several key characteristics. It should be clear and precise so that it can be easily understood. It must be testable through empirical methods. It should be specific and focused on a particular relationship. It should establish a logical connection between variables. Finally, it should be consistent with existing knowledge and theory. Steps in hypothesis formulation. There are several steps involved in formulating a hypothesis. First, the researcher identifies the research problem. Second, they conduct a review of relevant literature. Third, they identify the key variables involved. Next, they establish the expected relationship between these variables. Finally, they formulate a clear, specific, and testable hypothesis. In conclusion, a hypothesis is the backbone of any research study. It provides direction, improves clarity, and allows researchers to test relationship in a specific scientific manner. Understanding different types of hypotheses, especially in the null and alternative hypothesis, is essential for conducting proper research and making valid conclusions. Thank you for watching this video. That's it for today. Hope you like it.